Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight I'm in the Sierra Nevada. Got a pretty cool spot I'm in. And for our story tonight, we have a story that's the only word I can think of is creepy. That's next. All right, for tonight's beer, we have a New Belgium Voodoo Ranger, and that is an IPA. And fortunately, I found a small creek. I think it was a spring coming out of this ravine here, and I was able to drop it in there. Got it nice and cold, So I was up on the ridge. It was pretty windy up there, so I decided it was best to come down, get in the trees here, and I think I got a good spot. It's kind of a creepy spot with these thick trees around me, and it's pretty appropriate for tonight. So here's our beer. And I do have bear spray tonight. Got the bear deterrent pepper spray. Good thing to have. Just never know. Also, I did see when I was at the top of the ridge earlier this evening, I saw a bear print up there, and I took the warning and decided, yeah, I'm just going to come down. And with the wind, you always got to be watching for sign. Cheers. So back in the early 90s, 1994, a young boy, 10-year-old boy, his family moved to Maine. Little community called Georgetown, Maine, near the coast, because his grandfather passed away and his dad wanted them and him to be closer to his grandmother. So he'd been there about a year, and then he turned 11, and then he met a neighbor about 2 blocks away, and her name was Gabby, and she was also 11 years old. And they became fast friends and really, really close friends, and they hung out pretty much every day after school. And so one day they're at the general store, and they're in the general store browsing around, and she said, "Hey, do you want to go see my cousin?" And he said, "Okay." And then she quickly grabbed some potato chips, bags of potato chips. And she actually grabbed 10 bags of potato chips and went to the checkout line. And then Thomas said, "Why so many potato chips?" And she said, "My cousin really likes potato chips." And he went, "Okay." So they left the store, put the potato chips in the baskets on the bikes and started riding through town. So they're riding and they're heading towards the edge of town, and Thomas is kind of thinking, where does her cousin actually live? Because out of town is forest and this road here. And Gabby was out in front of him quite a ways, and then next thing you know, they're out of town and they're biking along, and she's way out in front of him, and he yells, "Hey Gabby, where does your cousin live?" And she either acted like she couldn't hear him, or she was ignoring him, or couldn't hear him, something, but she just kept going. He was having a hard time keeping up with her. And he yells out again, "Gabby, where does your cousin live?" And finally she hits the brakes on the bike, turns it sideways. You know when you got the one speed and you just lock up the sprocket and you turn sideways? She turns it sideways and she goes, "Okay, I need you to pinky swear that you will never tell anyone about my cousin." She held out her hand like that, and he went, "Okay, I guess." And he pinky swore that he wouldn't tell anybody about her cousin. And then she goes, "Okay, let's go." And then they kept riding, and they were getting way out there, about 1.5 miles out of town, and she takes the left-hand turn into the forest on this smaller road, and they go down that road for quite a ways. And at this point, he's just kind of quiet, like, okay, I don't know where she's really going. And then she takes another turn, and he sees a sign, and it was for a land preserve. There's a number of land preserves in Maine. Goes down the road a little ways, and all of a sudden, she gets to like a trailhead. She stops the bike, gets off, pulls out the padlock, and she starts locking the bikes together, and she goes, "Okay, I'm going to tell you about my cousin." And he's like, "Okay, you got my attention here. Who is your cousin?" And turns out this land preserve is a gigantic forest. And they're at the edge of this thing, and there's a big meadow, and it goes back their ways. It's midday, later midday, but it's late afternoon. Real bright, though. And she goes, "Okay, so we were out here about a year ago as a family, and we had a family picnic last summer. And I was hanging out with the family, and I decided to leave this meadow where we were having the picnic and go off into the woods. I wanted to find some acorns to make some jewelry with." She's 11 years old, little girl, likes doing things like that, and she's very curious and not afraid of things. So she goes into this, off the meadow into the woods, and she sees this log, and she finds some acorns, and she picks up a few, and she's sitting on this log checking out the acorns, and she's got a little hoodie on with pockets, and she's starting to put them in there, and she's got a bag of potato chips actually in this pocket. And then she has this feeling like she's being watched. This is a 10-year-old. This was a year earlier. Now she's 11. Gabby's 11. And she doesn't panic, doesn't freak out and start running, but she just has this feeling she's being watched. It's pretty hard to describe. I'm sure I've never really had that feeling myself, but I know it's real. And she kind of sits there and just kind of waits and listens, and then she hears something behind her, some wood crack, like something's walking. You know, this kind of something stepped on something and it cracked. And she looked this way, and then when she looked back this way, she saw it walk around this bush and then kind of out in front of her. And it was a large being, hairy being, and it was about 12 feet away, and it was kind of nonchalantly looking at her. She didn't panic. Sometimes kids they have a different mindset about things. They believe in things that we don't believe, and they relate to things differently. There's a lot of horror movies with little kids that connect with with the unknown, right? Red rum, example. And she's very apprehensive, mind you. And this thing is kind of standing there, and she pulls out her potato chips, and she just reaches out and gives the potato chips to this thing, very large, 8.5-foot thing, and it reached down and accepted it from her and ate some. According to this encounter story, she ate some. It ate some, I'm sorry. And then it kind of looked towards where the family was, looked at her, and then it just quietly walked back off into the trees. And she quickly went, okay. And she left the woods and went into the meadow back to her family, and she went and told her family. They were sitting at the picnic table. Their dad was walking up, and she said, I was in the woods, and she explained kind of this whole encounter that she had. Holy moly. And then her dad walked up and picked up part of it about some hairy man. And turns out the family has a cousin that is apparently kind of hairy, and he's kind of the butt of some family jokes. And he said, oh, our cousin Ed must have stopped by to say hello. Something like that. And the whole family kind of thought that was funny because they all know Uncle Ed, or whoever he really was, their cousin. And so it turned out the whole family dismissed what Gabby was trying to tell them about what she just experienced in the woods as a, very imaginative 11-year-old child, 11-year-old girl. And so after hearing this, Thomas thought, is she trying to prank me? And maybe her cousin is like going to be wearing some kind of a costume. He's going to jump out and try to scare me or something. He wasn't really sure what was really going on, because it was just sounded, even for an 11-year-old, it sounded pretty far-fetched. But he was like, okay, well, I trust my friends, so we're going to go on this hike and just whatever, see what happens. So they started hiking through this meadow. They went a considerable distance. They went into the woods, and she was busy munching on some potato chips. They had a small backpack with the rest of them in it, and she was chewing on these potato chips with her mouth open, kind of making some noise, like she wanted to attract this thing. And they got to a certain point, and she seemed to know what was going on, and she's, okay, right here. And they left the trail and went through the woods, and then they got to this clearing. Not really a meadow, just more of like a clearing in the woods. And at the other end of the clearing was this really good-sized tree. Thomas couldn't remember what kind of tree it was, but it was a very climbable tree. It was like a kid's dream, right? To have a big climbing tree with lowered limbs, and it's the bigger limbs, so you're not going through the, like brush or something to get up to it. And they both climbed up this tree, and Thomas got to the top of the tree, or, up a ways, and he saw other bags of potato chips kind of stuck in the branches and hanging up in this tree, a number of them. And they were kind of faded and looked like they had been there quite a while, like she had been coming out here on a regular basis or something. And they were sitting up in this tree, and she's still eating some potato chips. And he's thinking, this is kind of cool, really a cool tree here, and I like being out in the woods, it's kind of fun. And she said, hold on, I think I'm going to go look for my cousin. I'm going to go look for him. So she climbs down the tree and disappears out the end of the clearing there behind this big tree that they're in. And he's just sitting up in this tree, just enjoying the moment, really. Just kind of relaxing and kind of taking his mind off things and this whole cousin thing. And before you know it, he hears, come on, come on, come on. And he looks down, Thomas looks down through the branches, and he sees Gabby, and behind her, he sees this thing, this being, and it's kind of slumped over. It's good. It's huge. It's good size. It's a big chest on it and hairy, and it goes at the base of the tree, and it's like on all fours, kind of like that. And Thomas is stunned, and he doesn't know whether to scream or to climb out of the tree and run. He's just like taken back about what is this? And the branches are kind of in the way, so it's obscuring some of it, but he sees enough. It scares the hell out of him. And he kind of realizes he's just too petrified to do anything, so he just sits up in this tree. And Gabby is feeding it potato chips. Like she said, he really likes potato chips. And Thomas, years later, he couldn't get over this image in his mind of seeing this very large hand. It looked like a baseball mitt, taking potato chips from a baby's hand. That's what he pictured. The scale of it was that it felt like a baseball mitt with a baby's hand. And she always remembered that. This was just the weirdest feeling in the world to have this. He's looking down on this thing, and Gabby is so nonchalant about it, like it's a pet or something, like it's this newfound neighbor's pet that she's feeding it. Also, Thomas remembered, there was this horrible stench in the air, like a wet dog and maybe urine or something. Whenever the little breeze would blow, you would smell this thing, and it wasn't as bad as others had said. He's read years later that other people had experienced a similar smell with these things. So all the while Thomas is experiencing this thing and having these really intense feelings, very intimidating experience, he's up in this tree, and his foot was on a branch, kind of giving him a little support, and his foot slipped just for a moment, but it made a noise, and the creature looked up at him, and it made this intimidating grunt, and it bared its teeth at him, like its chipped yellow teeth, and it looked right at Thomas, and he was just hanging onto this tree and just trying not to move at all. And then right away, Gabby says, "It's okay, it's okay. He's my friend. It's okay." And he's up there watching this whole thing, and the idea of seeing this creature was just staggering to him. But what was even more hard to come to terms with was that his good friend Gabby was just so nonchalant about it. And he just never really came to terms and understood what that was, because he had so much fear, and most people have so much fear with these things. For good reason, too, obviously. So after what seemed like a full minute of this creature grunting and looking directly at Thomas, I think it was closer to like 10 seconds, it seemed to calm down and not see Thomas as a threat, and it went back to eating the potato chips from Gabby's hand. And he was just sitting up in this tree, just really stunned what he was seeing, and there's just feeling of, I just really don't want to be here, and almost this feeling of, this is something I shouldn't even be looking at. I shouldn't be seeing this. It was like it was forbidden to be that close to something. It's one thing to be driving in your car and see something and run across the road and go into the forest. That's a major revelation right there. But to be that close and then have your friend be so nonchalant about this real world monster. You know, he's an 11-year-old kid, and when you're 11, you're still coming to deal with, they always told me Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny was real. I think at 9, 10 or whatever, and you go, well, that wasn't true. There's no such thing as Santa Claus and Easter Bunny. Spoiler alert. And then this very thing that's not supposed to be true, he's looking at it. Real world monster. Wow. And he's just, all this is going through his head, and years later, this is the things that he remembered about this. And then suddenly they thought they maybe heard some other hikers off on the trail, kind of coming down the trail. And this thing kind of looked around, looked at Gabby, and then it just nonchalantly walked off behind the tree and back into the brush, just disappeared. Was gone. Felt some relief, and then Gabby just climbs up in the tree, doesn't even say a word, and just sits next to him. And then Thomas is like, do you think that was maybe Bigfoot? She goes, maybe, not sure. And he had this idea of Bigfoot was like this thing that lived out in California somewhere, and he's in Maine, other end of the country. And he's like, wow, this is really crazy. And so that was his story. They got down and they went back out and left. And then years later, he lost track with her and never really came to grips with what they had experienced that particular day. And obviously she'd been doing this on her own, and just really creepy. And yet, wow, I'm glad she wasn't hurt and anything like that. But this was what happened in Maine in 1994. And that is my story for tonight. And it is pitch black, and I am glad I am not up on that ridge. I was thinking about doing a story up there, and the wind was too much, and I just thought, it's just too much. You got to listen to yourself. Listen to your gut, your instincts. If there's any signs, anything that's not right, you just go, yeah, let's just head back. And my car is not too far away that way, and I'm going to be actually spending the night. I got my tent, so I'm just going to pitch the tent next to the car, and then wake up and head on out. So, all right, you guys. I am having fun with this, so thank you for all your comments and your new subscribers and the likes and the views and everything else. That's pretty amazing for me. Pretty amazing. We're having a lot of fun here, though, with this. And so we'll see you next time. And I got a lot more stories to come and a lot more adventures to be had and beer to drink. So we'll see you in the next one. All right, keep hiking.